We are sometimes oblivious to the number of choices we make every day, and equally oblivious to the consequences of each action, each step that we take in one direction. The fact remains that we are all on some path, and each path has a destination. For those of us who are followers of Christ, our destination isn't some palace in the clouds as much as it is Christ. But for those who do not lead a life according to God's standards, the path is bound to have more than its fair share of detours, dead ends, loop-arounds, and thorns and rocks that lead us to the question, why must I continue in hardship and find no relief? Where are my companions and friends to share in this burden that is so heavy on my soul? We feel abandoned, stranded, and utterly alone. One of the great falsehoods of our time is the idea that all paths lead to God. Far too many in today's age live their lives according to their own code of self-serving privileges, immorality in the name of leisure, and there have been few deceptions more poisonous to the human soul. But even within that statement, there is still a great truth. Even from the lowest reaches of a path based on selfishness and unrighteousness, there are ample chances to turn around and go up the hill.
Morning. So I found something that was really unfortunate this week. I was scrolling through my Twitter feed, and an advertisement came up for me for a new series on Hulu that is titled The Path. Has anyone else seen this ever? Yeah, those of you who have are snickering for good reason, because it turns out this series is about a guy who joins a cult that ruins his life. And I was like, well, that's unfortunate. That is not great timing on our behalf. So what we're talking about today has nothing to do with that. These are in no way related whatsoever. But if you were with us last week for Easter Sunday, we started the series, The Path, which we said the path is basically this. How do I become the person who I was created to be? And we started with this basic problem that we said at some point in time, we should all be able to encounter this truth in our lives, that how do I deal with the problem when the problem is me? And for me, I said it like this, that I've realized that there is no one who has done more to sabotage my success and my happiness than I have. And so the issue of like the life that I want to live, the person who I want to become, it's not external factors, it's not other people, it's not systems or structures or any of these circumstances that we typically want to blame. My biggest problem is me. And so how do I become that person? And as we track through the story of Easter and what Jesus did on the cross and in the resurrection, we kind of landed on this closing statement for us last week, that the cross is for me. That what Jesus did through the cross is he gave us a path to become the person who we were created to be. And that many things in our lives are going to conspire against us because they want to keep us the same, because that's what I gave the example of my phone, that's what it's comfortable with, which I understand if you weren't here last week sounds like a really odd example right now. So you just need to go back and listen to that, or just take my word for it, that that's how it is. But then what Jesus is actually doing is he's attempting to fulfill me, not in the sense of emotional satisfaction, but bring me to completion. And so that's kind of where we left off last week in the path, kind of this general path that anyone can go on as they encounter faith and as they understand what Jesus is attempting to do in our lives. And today, we're going to talk about kind of where the path splits off, and where the path can kind of take on two different focuses. And I want to use some props to kind of lay this out as an example. Then I'm going to pause and leave these behind for a while, and then we'll pick them up at the end. So last week, you may not be able to read this depending on how far back you are or how good your eyesight is. So last week, we really focused on this part of it, which I've defined it here. What it says, if you can't read it, is this is the part of faith we love. And the part of faith that we love is this. It's talking about mercy, grace, love, and hope. And I have never met somebody, no matter what your views on God are, no matter what your views on religion, and no matter what your views on spirituality or anything with that doesn't want to have some conversation with this. Now, it may feel awkward at first to talk about it. It may feel strange to enter into these conversations because we're not used to it. But like talking about these ideas of mercy, grace, love, and hope, they just kind of, they make you feel all warm inside. They make you feel nice. And so we just kind of want to sit in there. But there's another side of faith, and this is the part that we're going to talk about today. And I've got this labeled, this is the faith that we ignore. That if we can, we want to dismiss ourselves from these conversations, or we just don't want to think about it altogether. And the part of faith that we ignore has to do with rules, discipline, and sacrifice. And when I say discipline, I don't mean in the sense like, I don't mean like time out and things like that, and excommunication if we took it in the religious sense. I mean like the practices in our lives. Like people talk about reading your Bible, praying daily, like having those personal disciplines within us. And so that's what that refers to. But I rarely encounter people who are like, oh yeah, could we talk about personal sacrifice? Like, this is what I want to talk about. Like, if I've got the option to talk about how mercy was extended to me versus my need to sacrifice, I choose mercy every time, like every single time, because there's a lot more personal cost when it comes to this. And I also see there's like kind of one other division to this. The bottom statement here says, this is about who we are. Like, you say that like we are called to be, and I'll use these phrases, we are called to be people who love our neighbor. We are called to be people who extend grace. And it kind of like gives us this, I don't think over-glorified picture of who we're called to be in any sense, because I do believe that's who we're called to be. But like, it really sets us in the best light. And we're just like, yeah, I want to be that. I don't know if I am, but I think I could be. And that sounds nice. And then we get on this side, and this is really about what we do. Like these are our actions throughout our life. These are our behaviors that we adopt. And I think this is incredibly important because as we talk about the idea of the path, that the stuff written on this side, this is kind of the general path, the message and the offer that is extended to all of us. What's written over here has to do with our decision on that path. And this is really what I found, is we overemphasize this part, and we would really rather go light on this part. But I think that is, I think that's a bad decision. I think that's a dangerous decision. And today I want to explain why. And my hope at the end of the day today is that you'll see that this part of your faith is not like something you have to begrudgingly take on. It's not like one of those things like, well, yeah, you said rules, discipline, and sacrifice is important, so I guess that should be part of my life. I think it's something that we should gladly encounter, that we should joyfully take on. Because I hope what you'll see today is that it makes a massive difference in terms of how mercy, grace, love, and hope make their way into our souls and make its way into our lives. So this is what's going to happen right now is I'm just going to like leave those there, and we'll get back to those at the very end. So as we're going through this, if you're wondering like, what does that have to do with that? Like, honestly, for right now, nothing, for a little bit. But I'll get you at the end. So if you're confused, don't worry. You probably should be confused. And then we'll tie it up together, put a nice bow on it, and send you out. Sound good? You're excited. I can tell. Thank you very much for that. So if you have your Bible with you, if you'll open it up to the book of Philippians is where we're going to be. And in this series, The Path, we are just looking at these 3 small verses in the book of Philippians chapter 3. We kind of covered them all briefly last week, but we really focused in on the first verse, which is verse 18. And today we're going to look at all of them again, but we're going to spend the majority of our time on verse 19. So we'll go ahead and get started as you're moving there. So this is Philippians chapter 3, starting in verse 18. And it says this, "For as I have often told you before, and now tell you again, even with tears, many live as enemies of the cross of Christ." And if you were with us last week, what we said is that most of our emphasis, most of our focus is on the fact that it says we are enemies of the cross. But what he actually says is not that we're enemies of the cross, because you cannot be an enemy of the cross, because the cross is for you, the cross is for me. But the issue is that we live as enemies of the cross. And then this is what he says next. And this is one of those passages of Scripture that it would be my guess that you have probably never heard a message on, no matter how long you've been in church. And if there is a chance you heard a message, it is probably from a sweaty, angry old man who was not happy with life. I don't know why he needs to be sweaty, but I think he's sweaty in my head. So, which I can't say much because sometimes I get sweaty. So, nothing against sweaty. Not that you were worried about that. So, all right, so here's verse 19, and we're going to take through this bit by bit. So he's now explaining how we live as an enemy, and he starts with this. Their destiny is destruction. Opening lines to verse 19. Many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. How do we live as enemies of the cross? And he starts, their destiny is destruction. Now, I think this comes in two senses. I think in one sense, or there's two ways that we commonly interpret this. The one way that we look at this is we talk about hell, and we talk about being eternally separated from God, and that's there. The other side that we need to understand within this is a matter of the fact that if the cross is for you, and if the cross is the way for you to be fulfilled, not in the sense that you are emotionally fulfilled, but you are brought to completion in terms of the person who you were created to be, then if you live as an enemy of the cross, what happens is you can never become the person who you were created to be. In a sense, you live your life as a shell of the person who you were intended to be. And I don't know about you, but that is not a good fate. If we take the eternal side out of it, and we just talked about the 50, 60, 70, maybe 80 years that we have here on this earth, the idea that I am constantly living my life as a shell of the person who I was created to be sounds horrific. Like, it really does. It sounds awful. And I think when he talks about the sense of our destiny is destruction, referring to both. I think he's talking in the sense of eternal separation from God because we don't know Jesus, but I think it's also a matter of the fact that we cannot be fulfilled. We cannot be brought to completion. And so he kind of gives this is like this first overarching statement. When we live as an enemy, what happens is our destiny is destruction. And then he's going to give two specific examples in terms of the things in our lives that leads us to that. So this is what he says next. So their destiny is destruction. Their God is their stomach. Their God is their stomach. What he means here is not actually that we worship our belly. That's not what it's about. It's a matter of fact that whatever appetite comes into our lives, whatever appetite we have, is what we automatically pursue. And here's something that I think is so interesting is people talk about the idea of self-control as like almost as something that's part of our DNA. Like, oh yeah, well, I have really good self-control. Like as if somehow this is part of our genetic makeup to either have good self-control or not have good self-control. And if anything, I've seen something completely different, that self-control is a learned behavior. Self-control is a skill that you can acquire throughout your life by practicing it over and over again. And I think what's happened as a result of that understanding is because we just kind of view as, well, I either have self-control or I don't have self-control, then whatever appetite, whatever desire we have in our lives, we assume that if we don't have self-control, if we kind of label ourselves as one of those people who don't, which, by the way, who wants to label themselves as one of those people like, I've got great self-control? Like, that person's not getting invited to the party, right? Like in high school, like, do you want to come? No, I have really good self-control. I take care of myself well. You're fun. So we kind of had this like glorification of just do whatever comes up, just do whatever desire is there, and then it becomes part of our lives. And so what happens is, as a result, is whether the appetites in our lives are actually good or bad, we really have no discernment of whatsoever. If we have a desire, we act on it. And then here's the crazy thing to me that we've done in our culture today, and I just don't understand this, is somehow we have labeled whatever desire you have and acting on it as being true to yourself. And it's like, what? I don't get that. This reference is a little bit dated, so I apologize that I don't have a more modern one. But I remember, like way back in the day. I remember when Brad Pitt was married to Jennifer Aniston. Anyone else remember those days? Yeah, there we go. Thank you, people, for being with me. And then, spoiler alert, he cheated on her. Everyone's shocked. Oh, that sounds bad with Brad, and I like Brad. So, he cheated on her with Angelina Jolie. They were working on a movie together, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and like the statement that came out was like, "We didn't intend to, we just couldn't help ourselves. We couldn't help ourselves." That is the same thing I said when I was a child and I had candy that I wasn't allowed to eat. Like, that's the same thing I said. Like, have like the Easter basket and it was filled with Cadbury eggs and I would just suck that juice out of the middle of it like it was milk. Like, it was, oh my goodness, that stuff was incredible. And I'd eat like 6 Cadbury eggs and my mom would be like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I just couldn't help myself." Like, it's just so good. And she'd be like, "You have no self-control. This is bad for you. You're going to get sick," which would usually end up happening because I kind of have a weak stomach. But it was kind of like, it was this sense of like, when I was a child, that was like, you're acting like a child. But then as we become adults and we have no self-control in our lives, it's labeled being true to yourself. Do you see the insanity of this? And so what happens is because our gods are our stomach and we've got this idea that whatever desire you have, you should automatically pursue and attempt to fulfill, is we've really become people with no discernment. And whatever we act on, whether it has good implications or bad, whether it hurts us or hurts those around us, we just fulfill anyway because we're being true to ourselves. And so he says this is one way that we pursue the path that leads to destruction. And then we're going to have fun with this second one. Here's the second way that he says. He says, "And their glory is in their shame." Shame defines the emotional feeling that we should feel when we have done something wrong that we should be embarrassed about. Like, shame, in a sense, it shouldn't be something that like covers our lives, but in a moment when you've done something wrong and embarrassing, to feel shame is not necessarily a bad thing. It means you're not a sociopath, okay? So that is kind of like a healthy response that we do at times feel shame in our lives. Now, it shouldn't constantly be there, but it should in a moment be there. And what he describes here is he says, their glory is in their shame. So what he's saying is we in a sense, we take pride in the things that we should be embarrassed about that we've done wrong. That makes sense just there originally? Okay, let me give you 2 examples. And the first one I probably shouldn't, but I really just can't help myself. So we could say that my God is my stomach, and I'm just going to go with whatever I have. We're in the fall, we're going to do a series on politics, which I am super excited about, which we're going to say all the things about all the things, which will be lots of fun. But I've kind of tried to taper it back leading up to that and just small things here and there. But I am fascinated by the political process. And recently, and I'm not going to make an overarching statement. I'm going to make a comment on one statement, okay? Just one statement, and I'm going to leave it there. And if you don't like it, we can talk afterwards. Just one statement, okay? So one of our political candidates recently made the comment that if he shot someone on Main Street, he wouldn't lose a vote. And then he laughed. Could we just acknowledge that this is not a good thing? Like, right? Like, if you shoot someone, you should lose votes. But, and again, that's not in actual action. I'm not getting into any actions that he did, okay? I'm not commenting on that. Just that one statement that I'm not even meaning to reflect him as a candidate. I'm meaning it to reflect our culture. And he's probably right. And that was the fascinating thing is all the political like correspondents and commentators, no matter what station they were on, they're like, he probably wouldn't lose a vote. Everybody would probably still vote for him. That's not a good thing. That is the things that we should be embarrassed about, we actually are beginning to take pride in. Another example that is far less divisive, although it may be, has to do with the show The Bachelor. I do not watch The Bachelor. My wife watches The Bachelor. I am merely in the room every time it's on, okay? As a supportive spouse, okay? So, there we go. So recently, The Bachelor season, it was The Bachelor season ended, and they have like this show that's at the end that it's like The Women Tell All or something like that, that's the one I want to skip. That one's a nightmare. Like, oh my gosh. And so, but I was kind of in the room, I was folding laundry, being a supportive husband, okay? That's how you need to understand that while that's going on. And they brought this one girl up on stage, and they're like, you had a lot of drama. And she's like, yeah, I did. I don't even know what happened. Like, it's all drama. But like, yeah, you really struggled hanging out with the other girls. And they're like, yeah, it just didn't go well. She was mean, and she was mean, and she was mean. And then the host, Chris Harrison, he says this. He goes, we really think you're better off for, I think it's called Bachelor Paradise. Am I getting that right, Bachelor fans? You don't have to acknowledge yourself. Okay, you're not going to acknowledge yourself. I understand how that's going to go. And so, like, Bachelor Paradise is basically like this summer thing where they send all the crazy people on the show to hook up with each other. I think that's actually how it reads on my DirecTV info description. Like, all the crazy people from the episodes of The Bachelor go to this one place during the summer to hook up. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kentucky Sports Radio. One of his comments on that was, he said, when Chris Harrison tells you you're better off for Bachelor Paradise, you need to rethink your life. I was like, that is fantastic. But that's how everybody understands it. And so the host tells her that we think you're better for Bachelor in Paradise, and she's sitting there, she's like, really? Oh, thank goodness, I'm so excited. And I was like, wait, he just basically said you're a train wreck of a life and you have no emotional depth whatsoever, so go enjoy more drama on national television for us to enjoy. Like, that's really what that statement was. But she was thrilled. Our glory's in our shame. Like, that's what that is. The things that we should be embarrassed about, we begin to take pride in. The stories that maybe we tell at about earlier stages in life, we don't necessarily tell them for the lessons that we should pass on, but we laugh about the ways that we screwed up. Which, again, I think we should laugh at ourselves, but there's a difference between telling stories to pass on wise discernment and also understanding, reacquainting ourselves with our humility, and laughing at the wild life that we used to live. These are very different things, but in both of them, our glory is in our shame. And then he says this to sum it up at the end. He says, their mind is set on earthly things. So he's saying this is your central problem. Okay? The reason why your destiny is destruction is because your mind is set on earthly things. You're not focused on the things that matter. You're not focused on the things that last. You're not focused on the things that have eternal value. Your appetite is your God. Your glory is in your shame. Now, I want to pause right here, and this is really important that we understand this. The person who is writing this is the Apostle Paul, who is one of the heroes of the first century church. He is writing this letter to the church for application within the church. And this is this crazy thing that we do, is somewhere along the way, we've started reading those words and we apply it to the external world who do not claim to follow Christ. And we go, yeah, their destiny is destruction because their God is their stomach. Their glory is in their shame, and it's because their mind is set on earthly things. But Paul goes, no, you. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to us. And so we need to pause right here because I'll say it like this first, okay? I'll point it at me, and then I'll point it back at you because I think that's equally important. This is true of me. I don't think always, but it is an adequate description at times of my life. And in the same boat, this is true of you. If someone were to watch your life closely, they may not say this is the majority of the time. They may not even say this is often, but they would say that that's you at times. And we need to sit in there for a second because that's important. that this is a description of who we are. And we go, no. Mercy, grace, love, hope. This is who we are, because that's the faith we want to talk about. But Paul goes, no. Destruction, appetites. This is who we are as well. And inevitably, when we talk about the things that we do, there's, as I've had conversations with people, this is what I found, is there's like some embrace of that, but there's usually quickly a rebuttal. And the rebuttal sounds like this. Yeah, but so do they. When we say we do these things, and we're like, okay, but then the response that we give in our heads, yeah, but so do they. Who cares? Nobody's perfect. Right? Do you find that? I mean, I find that within me, that when someone points out my flaws or my imperfections or the things that I've done wrong, there's usually some sense of like, yeah, I guess I do. But then the other part, it's like, yeah, but so does everybody. Like, nobody's perfect. Why are you getting on to me for this? Why are you going after me for that? And I think that understanding reflects a lack of embrace of the people who we were called to be. You see, when we talk about this stuff, yes, there is grace, okay? So for our imperfections, for our flaws, for our sin, there is absolutely grace that God has covered, that even though we have sinned and in our lives, we will continue to sin. We will continue to mess up. We believe that the power of the cross covers that sin and helps free us from not just the penalty, but the practice of sin in our lives, okay? So yes, there is grace. But it's important to note also what Paul says in verse 20, which he says this, but our citizenship is in heaven. Well, what he's crafting right here is this beautiful picture of the life that we commonly live compared to the people that we are called to be. And we're really going to spend a lot of time on this. Our citizenship is in heaven next week, and I'm incredibly excited about it. But what he is simply saying here is he is offering us an alternative way of life, a different type of community that we were intended to create, a different type of people who we were intended to be. And I think this is the best way that I've ever understood that contrast between mind is on earthly things and citizenship is in heaven, and why our mind is on earthly things is such a big deal. And this is how I've understood it. So the picture that you're going to see on the screen is a picture of a T cell. A T cell. It is also referred to as a CD4 cell. That is what Wikipedia tells me. So I'm going to trust them because they're never wrong. So this is a T cell. You have many of these T cells within your body. What the T cells do, if I'm going to make this overly simplistic, okay, I'm going to acknowledge for any of you in the medical field, I'm making this overly simplistic. But it kind of operates as like the generals. If the white blood cells in your body are your army against infections and your army against disease, the T cells in a way function as the generals, telling the white blood cells how many of them we need, telling them where to go, telling them how to fight infections. And so T cells within our body, if we are going to be healthy, are incredibly important and incredibly significant. Now, this next picture you're going to see, although it looks like really cool and something out of a sci-fi movie, is a picture of the HIV virus, which stands for the Human Immunodeficiency Virus, which is, I don't think I need to explain to you, is disastrous to our lives, disastrous to our immune system, the millions of people who have died from this as HIV progresses into AIDS, and just how fatal this is to our bodies. And what happens is this, is the HIV virus will attach itself to a T cell. And it will transform, this is a picture of a healthy T cell, if we can look at that. And then once the HIV has attached itself to the T cell, it'll turn it into this. And you can see like the little HIV particles within there, it's much smaller than the T cells actually are. And so what it does is it'll attach itself to the T cell, and it'll begin sending your body mixed signals. Instead of telling your body to create more white blood cells, it tells your body to create more HIV. Instead of sending the white blood cells in your body to the infection, it'll tell it to do different things. And so what HIV does, the most simple form, is it takes the generals in our body, the things that are there that are intended to protect what is good, and it turns it against itself to create and spread disease. Now, this is why Paul is so adamant about the way in which Christians live their lives. Because when he's calling us to be citizens of heaven, what he's telling us is we're supposed to create and be a part of what's good. But when your appetite is your God, when your glory is in your shame, and when your mind is on earthly things, what has happened is not only are you not able to do that, not only are you not able to create what's good, but you have, in a sense, become HIV to the Christian community. That you have turned what was intended for good and always meant to be the source of hope and protection for those who need it, and you have turned it against itself, and now you're working to spread disease and dysfunction. See, here's the thing that's so hard is we talk about the difficulties of practice and rules and sacrifices and all these other things, and it just seems like lesser things to us. It seems so unimportant. We want to talk about the things that matter. We want to talk about the things that make us feel good. But what Paul is showing us so clearly here is that we were intended to be what was good in the world. That when we embrace what the cross has done for us, it was supposed to be such a powerful and transformative force within our lives that we were supposed to quite literally infect the world with what was good. And when we claim Christ, but then live consciously an alternative life against that, we've become HIV to the Christian community. So here's the alternative. Rather than doing that, this is Matthew 16. And this is Jesus' words. It says this: "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." That sounds a lot like Paul's words, doesn't it? What Peter is attempting to do in this moment is he's trying to make what was good, he's trying to enter it into the world through force. And he thinks that's how Jesus is going to operate. And Jesus says, your mind is on earthly things because we are called to live a different way. And then this is what he says. It says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it.'" And so last week we said this, that the secret to you becoming the person who you were created to be is to embrace the cross, because the cross is for me. This week we see something that is just a little bit different, but it changes everything. And it is about the way in which we are called to live. And it's not just that the cross is for me in terms of fulfilling me, but it's the cross is for me. Like the cross is intended then to be mine. That it's meant to become a lifestyle. It's not just a statement of what God is trying to create me into and who I was created to be. It's a statement of the life that I am then supposed to live. And Jesus uses those key words. He says, whoever wants to follow me must deny themselves. Now, I want to pause for a second there. because there's an important question that we need to answer, and that's this. So what does that mean? Like, when we say the cross is for me, the cross is not just a statement of what God has done on my behalf, but then it's a statement of the life that I am called to live. What does that actually mean for me? What's that mean for you? And honestly, for you, I can't answer because I don't know. And I think what has happened is we've attempted to make our faith this I don't know. I think we've just kind of tried to make it this paint by the numbers thing. Like, well, I do this now, and then I do that now, and then I do that now because that's what the book tells me to do. And it's so different than that. Like, as you read the story of the New Testament, like what the followers of Christ were doing is they were constantly relying on God to reveal things to them and to show them their next actions. And I believe they had plans for their lives. I believe they had goals and things they wanted to do. But it was like moment by moment, they were seeing how God wanted them to speak, how God wanted them to act, all the different things that he wanted them to do. So for me to stand up here and to say to you, like, the cross is for me, this is your lifestyle, means this, I think is just ignorant. But I can tell you what it means for me and how it's led me. And this is... I am simple-minded in the sense that I cannot understand complex topics. I must break them down to its simplest form if I'm ever going to apply it. And so this is how I've understood it in my life. And this may not be true for you. That's for you to figure out. But this is how I've understood it. Is that whenever any situation or circumstance comes up, my initial gut reaction is to ask, what do I want to do? Like whether it's decisions with our family or decisions in our home or decisions with careers or jobs or kids or cars or anything else, whether it's big or small, my initial gut reaction is always, what do I want to do? And so I've had to switch that question. That I believe that what that passage, what that call of God on my life leads me to is not to ask what do I want to do, what do I want to do, but to simply ask, how can I help? And I know that sounds odd because it's such a big statement, but for me, that's how I've understood it in my life. That when different people come up in situations, my question is not, do I want to help them or not? When decisions are made, it's not, do I want to do this? The question is, how can I help in this moment? Whether I know you, whether I don't know you, whether you're close to me, whether you're a complete stranger. Now, I don't always do that well. I don't. Because my mind is set on earthly things. But I have had to train myself to ask that over and over and over again. And I believe this is how I live out denying myself in my life. And what happens is this, is that when I do that, I become part of what's good. I become part of what the church was always intended to be. And this is what I found, is that for most of us, our faith stops here. And we talk about the parts of faith that we love. We want to talk about mercy, grace, love, and hope because that's who we are. That makes us feel good inside. And for most of us, we've neglected this other side of looking at the rules, the discipline, and most importantly here is the sacrifices that we must adopt. But if I found anything, that these are great ideas, but when you adopt this in your life, the ideas become part of your identity. That actually living our lives is a different way, is how we become people of mercy. It's how we become people of grace. It's how we become people whose response is to love naturally or to forgive naturally. What happens is it takes some time to work its way out in our lives. But as long as these are just conversations, as long as these are just ideas, they never become who we are and who we were called to be. And it's important that we have these ideas together. Like, and I found it like this, if I could describe it like this. Churches who just talk about this, they're really nothing more than a nightclub. Like, they're not. And I know that fits because the lights are kind of dim right now. But like, they're not. They're nothing more than a nightclub because they make you feel good for a short period of time, but they really have no power to transform your life. It's an experience. It's a moment. Churches who only talk about this are a prison. They are. Like, if the conversation is all about rules, discipline, and sacrifice, then what we have is we have people trapped within the confines of religion. But we combine these conversations together. And we talk about who we were called to be and what God has done. And then we also equally talk about how it works its way out in our lives, the ways that we have fallen short of that, honestly. Like, honestly, look at the ways we have fallen short of that, and yet still looking at who the people we were called to be, it has the power to transform everything. And what I want you to know more than anything else is that is the faith that I want for you. That for me, in many ways, and I understand I am a work in progress, but that is the faith that I believe I found. One that is there through difficulty. One that doesn't buckle its knees when tough times come. One that has the power to change individuals and change relationships and change communities and change any situation that you come into, because you're not succumbing to circumstances, you're a part of what's good. And that's my hope for you more than anything else, is that you'll have a faith that is not secondary, but that you'll have a faith that is powerful. That you'll have a faith that is deeply embedded in who you are and isn't just a nice idea that we can talk about, but it becomes your identity. And I believe that is what Jesus has called us to. Let me pray for you. Father, I am eternally grateful for what you have done on the cross. And I find within myself consistently a desire to talk about the easy stuff, to talk about the nice stuff, to talk about the stuff that makes me feel good. But God, my prayer for myself and my prayer for all of us is that we will embrace a difficult faith. That we will choose, as we look at the paths that we can take in our lives, that we will not just simply succumb to whatever is easiest or whatever seems nicest. That we would understand that you are calling us to something that is deeper, something that is more substantial, something that is powerful, and something that is significant. That we would not shirk back from the call on our lives to deny ourselves, but that we would begin to embrace the freedom that is within sacrifice. That we would become part of what is good in the world, instead of infecting what was meant to be the light. Give us a heart for what matters. Give us a desire for you. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.